Traumagotchi. It's a web project for what they call virtual spellcasting, collective healing, and general deep machine incantation. You go on the site and you're like directed to create a virtual version of your trauma, which is called your Traumagotchi. Essentially, they become these creatures that tend to a space that they call deep in the machine world trauma compost shrine. So like your trauma lives in the space, and while the website is active, there's code in the shrine that casts virtual spells for healing. So the Traumagotchi can be fed, bathe, it can rest, and you can also program virtual self-care actions, but also self-harm actions as like coping mechanisms to recur every 5 minutes, 60 seconds, however. You can like release words or set intentions in the shrine. It's essentially like a concretized digital version of that shows like the physical labor of healing. I think it's also like an example of, I've been reading about this concept of data healing, which is a concept that came about from a guerrilla theorist and curator, Neema Githere, in response to the term data trauma, which was coined by a media artist and programmer to describe effects of navigating digital infrastructures and like dangers of exploitation, capitalism, being categorized, being discarded of your own personhood in the digital world. And I just wanted to like read a segment of this kind of manifesto on data healing. So she says, data healing is not an abstract, it's a movement. It is everything moving. It is madness and magic on screen. It is an experiment in channeling source. It is so real that it can be fake. It is fundamentally existential. It is how to make sense of what we feel digitally to understand what it all means for our bodies. So yeah, I think it's just the Traumagotchi is like an interesting digital materialization of this movement that uses experimenting with code, experimenting with digital language to promote healing.
That's like profound.
That.
It's cool. You can play on it and create your own Traumagotchi.
It's funny why, for some reason, it just feels like a really good idea and like a really effective version of this video game thing that, like, by comparison, Uda, your Signal, which was like the official RX one, just doesn't, like, I'm so much more skeptical of it.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. It sounds way more, like, useful, personally.
Yeah, and what a name. You really get it instantly.
Yeah, right away.
Yeah.
Powerful portmanteau.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like this pedify your shit.
Mm-hmm.
How would you frame the Signal?
I think there's like a signal of like power of like personification is really what I mean, but like a plan, like, or something like that, like building of like world building and making things that can feel quite abstract. Like, sure, the memories are somewhat real, but the effects of those memories on you, in the case of trauma, are quite abstract and strange and not well understood usually by the person who's going through them. And like that's the whole. It's using story to get a handle on things that torment our souls.
Yeah, I think it's like using a way to internalize and externalize like dark subjects.
And playfully, like that's the other big thing here, right?
Yeah.
But like externalizing your trauma like that and like imagining it in an object or in another sort of living entity that's not a new thing. That's like, you know, that's like an effective technique for thousands of years, possibly. I'm just trying to think about like what is new here?
I think what is new, but it's also old, now that I think about it, is digital witchcraft.
Yeah, there's also like digital doulas. That's like kind of a role that's sprung up and people identify themselves as that.
It kind of reminds me of like, remember when we used to get chain emails being like, you know, it's like, if you don't forward this, you're going to get bad luck for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's some sort of thread that ties those two together.
It's the digi-witchy superstition.
Yeah, and I think like with the data healing concept, there's also this, she also talks about like alchemizing trauma that is enacted by the internet into new technologies, like new digital materializations. So yeah, bringing in like that witchcraft idea that you're talking about there, Asia, but like using code and using computer language to kind of subvert the traumas that those digital infrastructures are also causing harm at the same time.
Well, you know, words are spells, you know.
This Signal or noise?
I think in the playful use of language around trauma, yeah, I think so. Because it has like often been used in a way that leaves no exit, I think, for the people affected. And maybe I won't like overrun the term. But I think the playful use of trauma is interesting. So I'm kind of curious from a cultural angle how that's shifting and the language around it. So yeah, I think it's a signal in that sense.
Asia?
Well, I love it as a signal, so I'm going to just give it 2 thumbs up. But I was just thinking, I wonder what the data that's collected on this will tell us about our trauma and about ourselves, or about like segments of the population as a whole. I wonder to what extent people want to self-harm their Traumagotchi. Like, what does that say, about us? So I'm interested to find out, maybe, if this becomes really popular and a lot of people use it, what does the data that's collected in this app tell us?
And also like what the traumas that people are personifying are.
Could it?
The use of magical language and sort of witchy stuff in technology isn't, to me, that's like also not that new. I've been kind of following that for the last few years. I think the one thing that stood out for me when Macy was describing it was the sort of little automated actions, like you can automate the self-harm and the self-care and whatever. I think that's really interesting. I think it's like, well, if you push that out even into the future, what does that look like? Can we have a fully like virtualized care machine that's like, you like externalize your trauma or whatever, and then there's basically an AI that's like taking care of you, in this virtual world in some way. That I think is like I don't know, like interesting to think about. I think it's a signal of something. Yeah,
there's something interesting, like it's a bit placebo-ish or something, but like that's fine, especially when you're talking about things like this that are abstract. Why would you want anything other than placebo? Whatever works.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, like the data point that Asia was making right now is, although it's interesting, I think that's like not even the point of this, right? It's like, you don't actually, do we want to know anything about like the quantified and sort of medicalized way of looking at trauma, or do you want something that's more
whether people want to torture their trauma or nurture it or what,
Yeah, but I think it's way more affective than like actually like whatever else it is. Yeah.
I wonder how, like, if they sold that data, how it would be used. That's the, I guess, or like how would they monetize it, and what would knowing about our traumas for the deepest place, like, what would they then sell to us? You know what I mean?
I find this to definitely be a signal, and particularly because I find there's something I can't quite articulate about why it just seems so right the way it was described, and why it seems like it would be so effective and work so well. To me, there's a tangibility, and that's what it is, or like a stickiness. There's something right about to me, it really feels like a way that you can have control over something that maybe controls you, and to take that back, and the idea that you can like lock it up, put it outside, like, automate sort of like the care or like healing of it seems empowering, like it would be empowering to a person, and sort of like a great step in the sort of like naming your trauma so that you can deal with it and dealing with it thing. It's like a little bit of a simple, like playful system that I think that just instinctually I think could be really useful as someone like, with no expertise.
Yeah, it's a cool one. I like it a lot.
Broadcast from later.